Greetings, Padawan. We are going to talk about your favorite writer, Edgar Allan Poe, and some fun facts about Mr. Poe. Allan is not his middle name. Allan is actually one of his last names. So that's something that a lot of people don't know. Good trivia. So if you ever want to create a trivia game, now you have a little nugget. So Poe was the son of two actors. They were Shakespearean actors, and his father abandoned him when he was 1, and then his mother died when he was 3 of tuberculosis. And so he was adopted by a wealthy family, the Allans. And so Allan Poe is actually their last name. So that's important to know, so that he was orphaned at 3. You know, if you're a psych person, maybe that sort of describes, where he's coming from. So Poe is one of the dark romantics, as is Hawthorne and Melville and Dickinson. The dark romantics are the flip side of the romantics like Thoreau and Emerson. And we're going to talk about what dark romanticism is in just a minute. So some other fun facts. The Raven was instantly successful, and Edgar Allan Poe is said to be the first professional writer in American culture. So what that means is that, like Emerson and Thoreau did other jobs to make money, and Hawthorne did other jobs to make money, either teaching or whatever. Poe exclusively was a writer, and that's all he did. He was the first American paid writer. Some say that he is the father of the modern detective novel with the murders at Rue Morgue. And so there's a little bit of debate, because there's a guy in Germany that wrote something very similar earlier. So some say that that guy is the father of it. But, Americans like to be proud. So we say that Edgar Allan Poe is the father of it. He did marry his 13-year-old cousin. And there's actually, if you ever go to Charleston, there's a great walk you can do, South Carolina, because he actually loved another girl, but the father didn't want anything to do with him at all, because he had a gambling problem. He got kicked out of college, and then he'd gotten kicked out of West Point. So the father didn't want her to marry him, and he would go visit her grave. And so the story goes that the father, she had died also of tuberculosis. So the father had her body buried in several different parts of the cemetery, so that Poe wouldn't know exactly where she was buried. So interesting tour if you're ever in South Carolina. But then he did end up marrying his cousin, who also died. And let's see, his cause of death, which you know from your activity that you have to do, is unknown. So there's a lot of different theories, but there's actually there's no proof of any of them being true. They said that he had an alcohol problem, but others say that he had cleaned up his act, quite a bit before then. And that he might have been a victim of cooping, which was at election time. These thugs would come and get capture you, ply you with alcohol, and then dress you up in different outfits and have you go vote at different polling booths. And given our most recent election, that's possible. So he was found in clothes that didn't fit him, and they called him a pretty boy, even though this particular picture, you don't get that sense. A lot of people had said he was really good looking and had great eyes and always dressed fashionably and stuff. So it was not usual or like him to wear clothes that were ill-fitting. So that's one of the reasons why cooping is one of the theories. Let's see. So he liked innovation. He liked the technology of the time, and he was one of the first proponents of what we now know as science fiction. So that's important. Poe wrote with his Siamese cat would sit on his shoulder, and there are pictures of him with the cat on his shoulder, and the cat died a few days after he died. So the little cat's heart was broken that he had died. He was the first person to use the term short story in reference to his works, even though Hawthorne wrote short stories and things like that. Nobody was calling him that, but he was the first person to say, I write these short stories. So to make sure I covered everything that I want you to know. he liked cryptology, so he would have been a modern hacker. His number one influence was the bad boy Lord Byron, who was a British romantic. You remember that from Module 1 when we looked at those. And so he really liked the work of Lord Byron. So even though Edgar Allan Poe seems like such an impressive name, such a fancy Gothic name, he signed his letters Eddie. So people knew him as Eddie Poe, not as Edgar Allan Poe. He was an athlete. He was a swimmer. He was a boxer. He did the long jump. So he was very athletic, which, when you look at this picture, you don't necessarily think about that. His first fiance that he had was a woman named Sarah, and he ended up, breaking, the engagement got broken, but then he was re-engaged to her right before he died, which is another theory about him not drinking. Like, he didn't drink himself to death because he was planning to get married to Sarah. We have this image of Edgar Allan Poe, Eddie Poe, being a madman, but actually that image comes from the guy who wrote his, anonymously or with a pen name, wrote his death notice in the paper, was his arch enemy. And so he wrote this scathing, obituary of him, and, said that he was a lunatic. And really, this guy hated him because one of Poe's jobs was to be a critic, and he had criticized his work. And so this was his way of getting him back. And so a lot of the stuff that was in that article about Poe was written by this enemy of his, and that's the picture of Poe that we get today. That he was, a gambler, and that he was a severe alcoholic, and that he did opium. And there's actually no proof that he ever did opium. Two doctors had said that he never. They reported that when they saw him, there was no evidence that he had ever done opium. So, just like today, history is written by the people who like you or don't, and in this case, his history was written by somebody who didn't like him. So let's talk about his work. So you're going to read some of his short stories, and I think it's funny because a lot of students are like, I love Poe, and then they start reading the stories and they say, wow, this is a lot longer than I remember it being. And that's because in the high school versions of the short stories, a lot of times they're abbreviated. Poems like The Raven aren't abbreviated, but some of the short stories are, so that might be why they are a little bit longer. And the language, of course, is a little bit more complicated because they're very detailed and descriptive. And in many ways, we think about Poe and Melville, not so much Hawthorne, because Hawthorne is from that transcendental movement specifically, but we think, well, what's the difference between these dark romantics and realists? Like, what's the difference? What makes Poe a romantic, right? So what makes him a romantic is that the romantic writers in general were all about originality, and they were all about free thinking and idealism and the supernatural and the mysterious, beauty, love, passion, and the natural world. So that's definitely true about Poe, right? That is definitely true. Those elements are definitely true in his work. The dark romantics, which are a subset of the Romantic period, where the romantics like Emerson and Thoreau thought that humans were good, and that we were one with nature. This subset of the dark romantics said we're one with nature, but nature has a bad side, right? Nature has a bad side, and humans are fallible. They're self-destructive. They will always go toward guilt and sin. They will always rain judgment upon one another. They will always go to the sign of punishment, either being punished or giving punishment, and that our psyche or our human nature leads us towards guilt and sin, whereas Thoreau and Emerson would say that we're free from that. So of the romantics, the dark romantics come, and it says it comes out of the transcendental movement because it kind of starts with Hawthorne. It's Hawthorne, Poe, Melville, and Dickinson. Those are all the dark romantics. And then, and you can think about it, like if we compare contrast, like in the bigger picture of Romanticism, beliefs and emotions are more important than logic and facts. And that's still true in the dark romantics, right? Like, how we feel is more important. The individual comes first and we worship nature, and humans are good, right? So they're very optimistic. Dark romantics are pessimistic, and they believe that human fallibility and sin, and they think about the evil side of spiritual truth, and but they still aren't. I mean, they're talking about just the facts, but they're still talking about the emotional side of facts. Where in realism, it's going to be just the facts. This is the plight of man as we see it right now in the tenements and in post Civil War America. Gothic literature, which is what Poe is the father of, right, is even another subset of dark romanticism. So, Big Balloon is American Romantics. In American Romantics are the dark romantics, and then within the dark romantics is the Gothic. Poe is the father of the American Gothic movement. Mary Shelley, on the British side, wrote Frankenstein. That's a Gothic piece. And Gothic is known, like what makes it Gothic as opposed to just dark romantic is the idea of sheer terror, of personal torment, of graphic morbidity, and the supernatural. So if you can categorize, that's how it all works. Some works that are specifically dark romantic are Moby Dick, which you have heard about, The Scarlet Letter by Hawthorne. You've read Young Goodman Brown, that's an example. Follow the House of Usher, that's Poe's. And Dickinson's poems, there's lots of different poems that she's written, but even just her style of not giving titles to poems, and she wrote so many, and she was a recluse, like she lived sort of the dark romantic lifestyle. So as you read Poe's work, you're going to watch the Simpsons episode, so of The Raven. I think one of the reasons I think Poe is so popular even today, because he's kind of like the father of modern horror, or like even the Twilight Zone kind of stuff. I think there is something to be said about the human interest in the sublime, or like why is Halloween so popular, right? Why do people like to decorate their stuff with haunted stuff and creepy stuff and stuff from the grave? I think humans kind of go that way. Like I think they just are naturally attracted to that kind of stuff, because you figure people decorate more for Halloween than they do for Easter or for, I don't know, Memorial Day, right? Like when we think about the holidays that people decorate the most for, it's Halloween and Christmas. And now, given all the things that you can buy, like, there are a lot of houses decorated for Halloween now more than there were when I was a kid, right? So I think there's some truth in what the dark romantics say. The idealism of Thoreau and Emerson, it's very easy to be idealistic when you live in Concord, Massachusetts, and you live in the woods and you're surrounded by like-minded people. It's Poe is writing out of Baltimore. By the way, the Baltimore Ravens comes from the Raven. Another trivia, right? When you're living in a city like Philadelphia or Baltimore, your worldview is a lot different than if you're living in Concord, Massachusetts. So I think there is some truth to it. Hawthorne's an interesting cat because he kind of was in all of those different areas, and so he was both in the intellectual spaces of New England, but also traveled extensively to the cities. So these are your notes for Poe. I'm interested to hear what you think about the stories that we read, and I'm interested in seeing your Poe projects. So good luck, Padawan. We're almost done. See you soon.